Two pregnant German shepherds were screaming for help from a well. What baby did next? Left everyone in tears. What you're about to listen to will break your heart and then put it back together again. A story of unbelievable courage from the most unexpected source. Leave a comment below telling us where you were watching from. The clouds hung low over the small village of Meadowbrook, their gray underbellies promising rain. 5-year-old Tommy played quietly at the edge of his mother's garden, his small fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. His mother, Sarah, watched him from the kitchen window as she washed the breakfast dishes, a small smile playing on her lips despite the worry that had become her constant companion. Tommy hadn't spoken a word in almost a year, not since that terrible night when flames had consumed their neighbor's house, the same night his father had walked out on them. The doctors called it selective mutism brought on by trauma. Sarah simply called it heartbreaking. "Tommy, stay where I can see you," she called through the open window. Tommy looked up, his solemn brown eyes meeting hers. He nodded once, then returned to his play. The air felt heavy, electric with the coming storm. Sarah dried her hands on a dish towel and glanced at the darkening sky. They'd need to come inside soon. As she turned to put away the last plate, a sharp crack of thunder split the air. She jumped, nearly dropping the dish. When she looked back at the garden, Tommy was gone. "Tommy!" Sarah rushed to the back door, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. "Tommy!" Only silence answered her call. The garden lay empty, the little pile of sticks Tommy had been arranging abandoned like forgotten toys. Sarah's eyes darted frantically across the yard, catching on the tree line that bordered their property. The dense woods stretched dark and foreboding beyond the neatly trimmed lawn. "No, no, no," she whispered, rushing down the steps. Tommy knew better than to go into the woods alone. He'd always been afraid of them, clinging to Sarah's hand whenever they walked the path to the village. Sarah ran across the yard, bare feet slipping on the dewy grass. "Tommy!" Her voice echoed back to her, hollow and alone. She reached the edge of the woods and hesitated for just a moment before plunging in. The forest swallowed her, wrapping her in shadow and the earthy scent of decaying leaves. Sarah stumbled forward, branches catching at her clothes, her hair. "Tommy, please!" Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please come back!" A faint track caught her eye, small impressions in the soft earth, the size of a child's shoe. Sarah followed them, heart in her throat, deeper into the trees. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. In the distance, thunder rumbled again. "Tommy!" Sarah called as she pushed through a tangle of undergrowth. The footprints led her ever deeper into the forest, away from the safety of home. What had possessed him to come this way? Tommy, who jumped at shadows and slept with his nightlight blazing. The rain began as a gentle patter, drops falling through the canopy to splash against Sarah's skin. She barely noticed, intent on the trail before her. It led down a gentle slope toward an old clearing that locals avoided. Sarah had heard stories about this place. An abandoned homestead, its well long since dried up. Nothing but a stone circle in the ground now, a mouth to nowhere. The footprints grew more distinct in the softening soil, heading straight for the clearing. Sarah quickened her pace, slipping and sliding down the incline. The rain fell harder now, plastering her shirt to her skin, turning the dirt to mud beneath her feet. She burst into the clearing just as lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in stark white. For a moment, Sarah couldn't understand what she was seeing. Tommy lay on his stomach at the edge of the old well, his small body half hidden by tall grass. His arms stretched downward into the darkness of the well. "Tommy!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward. Tommy didn't turn at her voice. His entire focus remained on whatever lay below. As Sarah drew closer, she heard it, whimpering, high-pitched and desperate, not human sounds. Sarah dropped to her knees beside her son, mud soaking through her jeans. "Tommy, what?" she began, then gasped as she peered over the edge of the well. Two pairs of amber eyes gazed up at her from the shadows. Dogs, German shepherds, huddled at the bottom of the well. One lay on its side, sides heaving with exertion. The other stood protectively over its companion, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Both were clearly pregnant, their swollen bellies bulging against ribs too prominent beneath matted fur. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "How did they get down there?" Tommy's small hand clutched at her sleeve. When she looked at him, his eyes were wide with an emotion she hadn't seen there in months. Not fear, but fierce determination. He pointed at the dogs, then mimicked pulling something up. His message was clear. We need to help them. "Tommy, they're too heavy. We need to call someone." Sarah fumbled for her phone, then remembered she'd left it on the kitchen counter. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the clearing into a muddy pool. The lightning flashed again, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Tommy shook his head vehemently. He pointed at the dog lying down, then made a pushing motion with his hands against his own stomach. Sarah understood with a jolt of horror. The dog was in labor. "We can't leave them," she murmured, more to herself than to Tommy. She looked around frantically for anything they could use. The well wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet, but its walls were steep and slick with rain and moss. Tommy was already moving, scrabbling through the wet grass. He pulled at long vines that twisted up the trunks of nearby trees, tugging them free with surprising strength. Sarah watched him for a moment, then followed his lead. Together they gathered armfuls of the woody vines, piling them beside the well. "Good thinking, Tommy," Sarah said, her voice catching. "We can make a rope." They worked in frantic silence, Sarah twisting the vines together, while Tommy continued to gather more. The rain pounded down, turning the world to a sheet of gray. Below, the dog's whimpers had grown more frequent, more desperate. "We need something to make a sling," Sarah said, glancing around. "Something they can sit in while we pull them up." Tommy vanished into the trees again, returning moments later with his jacket. He thrust it towards Sarah, chin set in determination. It was far too small to hold a full-grown German shepherd, let alone a pregnant one. "It's not big enough, sweetie," Sarah said gently. "We need—" She broke off as Tommy shook his head again. He pointed at the jacket, then at the vines they had twisted together, then made a cradle motion with his arms. Sarah stared at him for a long moment before understanding dawned. "You're right," she whispered. "We can use it to reinforce the middle of the rope, make it stronger where the weight will be heaviest." They worked together, threading the vines through the sleeves of the jacket, creating a makeshift harness. Sarah's fingers were numb with cold, slipping on the wet material. The storm raged around them, but neither noticed. All that mattered were the desperate creatures below. When the rope was finished, Sarah tied one end around the trunk of a sturdy oak at the edge of the clearing. "We'll lower it down," she told Tommy, "but I don't know if they'll understand what we want them to do." Tommy crawled to the edge of the well again. Sarah held his legs to keep him from slipping as he reached down, making soft clicking noises with his tongue. The dogs looked up, the standing one growling low in its throat. "Be careful, Tommy," Sarah cautioned. "They're scared. They might bite." But Tommy seemed unafraid. He continued making those gentle clicking sounds, reaching his small hand toward the dogs. The standing one's growl subsided. It took a hesitant step forward, sniffing the air. Sarah lowered their makeshift rope, the jacket cradle dangling just above the bottom of the well. "Now we need them to step into it," she murmured. Tommy leaned further over the edge, his entire upper body now inside the well. Sarah tightened her grip on his legs, heart pounding with fear. What if he slipped? What if the dogs attacked him? But something remarkable was happening. The standing dog approached the rope, sniffing at it cautiously. Tommy made another soft sound, and the dog looked up at him. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then, as if understanding exactly what was needed, the dog nudged its companion. The pregnant dog lying down struggled to its feet. With the standing dog's guidance, it stepped into the cradle of the jacket. Tommy pulled back, pointing excitedly at the rope. "You want us to pull now?" Sarah asked. Tommy nodded vigorously. Sarah grabbed the rope, wrapping it around her hands for better grip. "On 3, she told Tommy. 1, 2, 3. They pulled together, Sarah's muscles straining with the effort. The rope creaked ominously but held. Inch by inch, the pregnant dog rose from the bottom of the well, its companion watching from below with anxious eyes. The rain made the rope slippery, and Sarah's hands burned as it slid through her grasp. She gritted her teeth, digging her heels into the mud for better purchase. Tommy pulled with all his might, his small face a mask of concentration. "Almost there," Sarah gasped as the dog's head appeared at the edge of the well. With one final heave, they pulled the animal clear. It collapsed onto the wet grass, sides heaving, but alive. Tommy immediately turned back to the well, gesturing frantically at the second dog. Sarah nodded, lowering the rope again. This time, the remaining dog stepped into the cradle without hesitation. They pulled again, harder this time. Sarah's arms screamed with fatigue, but she refused to let go. Tommy's face was red with exertion, rain and tears mingling on his cheeks. The second dog was larger, heavier. The rope groaned under its weight. Just as its front paws reached the edge of the well, there was a sharp crack. One of the vines had snapped. The dog slipped, scrabbling desperately at the stone rim. No! Sarah lunged forward, grabbing for the animal's scruff. Her fingers closed on wet fur just as Tommy lost his balance, his small body pitching forward toward the gaping mouth of the well. Sarah's heart stopped. In that terrible moment, she had to choose, the dog or her son. Without conscious thought, she released the dog, her hand shooting out to catch Tommy's ankle. The dog slid backward, a frightened yelp escaping its muzzle as it tumbled down. Tommy twisted in her grasp, eyes wide with horror, as he watched the dog fall. Then, something happened that shook Sarah to her core. "No!" Tommy screamed, his voice hoarse from disuse but unmistakable. "Mama, help her!" Sarah froze, stunned by the sound of her son's voice after so many months of silence. Tommy's face was transformed by emotion, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Please, Mama," he begged. "Please help her." The dog that they had saved struggled to its feet and crawled to the edge of the well, whining pitifully as it peered down at its companion. Sarah looked from her son to the dog and back again. Something powerful passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a commitment. "We'll get her," Sarah promised, her voice breaking. "We'll get her out, Tommy. I promise." Tommy's shoulders slumped in relief. He wiped his eyes with muddy hands, leaving streaks across his face. Then, with renewed determination, he began gathering more vines from the forest edge. As Sarah watched her silent, traumatized son spring into action, speaking for the first time in a year, she knew that something miraculous was happening here in this clearing, in this storm. Whatever had awakened in Tommy to break his silence, she would not let it be in vain. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt cleansing rather than oppressive. Sarah joined her son in gathering vines, her heart lighter than it had been in months. They would save these dogs. They would bring them home. And maybe, just maybe, they would heal something broken in themselves along the way. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the clearing in brilliant white. In that flash, Sarah caught a glimpse of something metal glinting on the collar of the rescued dog, a tag of some kind, unusual in its shape. But there was no time to investigate now. The second dog needed them, and the storm was only growing stronger. With renewed purpose, Sarah and Tommy bent to their task, working side by side as the thunder rolled above them. The rescued German Shepherd watched them with intelligent eyes, as if understanding that the fate of her companion rested in their hands. And deep in the well, the second dog waited, her pregnant belly heaving with the precious life she carried. No one passing by would have expected the scene that unfolded in that forest clearing, a mother and her previously mute son, risking everything to save two strange dogs in the middle of a thunderstorm. But sometimes, Sarah thought as she worked, the most unexpected moments change everything. And sometimes, the most extraordinary courage comes from the smallest hearts. The thunder cracked overhead like a whip, making Sarah flinch. Her eyes never left the well, where the second dog remained trapped. Tommy worked feverishly beside her, gathering more vines to reinforce their makeshift rope. The rescued German Shepherd had dragged herself closer to them, her amber eyes fixed on Sarah with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "We need something stronger," Sarah muttered, inspecting their damaged rescue rope. The vines had proven too weak for the weight of the second dog. She glanced back toward the direction of their home, calculating. It would take at least 20 minutes to run back for proper rope, maybe longer in the storm. 20 minutes during which the trapped dog might give birth in that cold, wet hole. A low, pained howl rose from the well, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. She peered over the edge again. In the growing darkness, she could barely make out the dog's form at the bottom. The animal paced in tight, frantic circles, stopping occasionally to scratch at the stone walls. "She's going to hurt herself," Sarah said, turning to Tommy. To her surprise, her son had vanished. "Tommy?" Panic surged through her again, until she spotted him at the edge of the clearing, disappearing into the underbrush. "Tommy, wait!" But he was already gone, moving with purpose. Sarah hesitated, torn between following her son and staying with the dogs. The rescued German Shepherd whined softly, drawing Sarah's attention. The dog had managed to stand, though her legs trembled with exhaustion. She took a halting step toward Sarah, then stopped, her swollen belly heaving. "You need help too," Sarah murmured, running a gentle hand over the dog's wet fur. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, the tag she'd glimpsed earlier. She turned it over, frowning at what she saw. Not a typical pet ID, but something that looked almost military. A series of numbers and no name. Strange. Another howl echoed from the well, more desperate this time. Sarah returned to the edge, calling down in what she hoped was a soothing voice. "Hold on, girl. We're going to get you out." The rain had eased slightly, but water still trickled down the sides of the well, pooling at the bottom. The trapped yin was now standing in several inches of water, which was slowly rising. Sarah's heart pounded with fresh urgency. If the water kept rising at this rate, the dog could drown before they managed to rescue her. A rustling from the forest edge made Sarah turn. Tommy emerged from the trees, dragging something behind him. As he stepped into the clearing, Sarah realized what he had found. An old piece of tarpaulin, probably left behind by hunters or hikers. It was dirty and weathered, but intact. "Tommy, that's perfect," Sarah exclaimed, rushing to help him. "We can use this to make a stronger sling." Together they spread the tarpaulin on the ground. Sarah pulled a small pocket knife from her jeans, a habit from her childhood camping days that had never left her, and began cutting the material into strips. Tommy watched intently, then started twisting the remaining vines into a thicker rope. The rescued German Shepherd had dragged herself closer, watching their efforts with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Occasionally, she would whine and look toward the well, as if encouraging them to hurry. "I know, girl," Sarah murmured. "We're working as fast as we can." As if understanding her words, the dog laid her head on her paws, eyes never leaving their hands as they worked. Sarah noticed with growing concern that the animal's breathing had become more labored, her sides rippling with what looked like contractions. "Tommy, we need to work faster," she said, gesturing toward the dog. "I think she's going into labor." Tommy's eyes widened. He redoubled his efforts, his small fingers working nimbly with the vines. Sarah cut the last strip of tarpaulin and began weaving it through their vine rope, creating a stronger, more flexible rescue line. Below, the trapped bee's howls had taken on a new note of panic. Sarah peered into the well again and gasped. The water level had risen significantly, now reaching halfway up the dog's legs. The animal was pressing herself against the wall, trying to stay as far from the deepest part as possible. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, working even faster. Their time was running out. With one final knot, their improvised rescue rope was complete, stronger and more flexible than before, with a cradle of tarpaulin strips in the middle to support the dog's weight. Sarah immediately tied one end around the oak tree, testing it with her full weight before nodding to Tommy. "Ready?" she asked him. Tommy nodded solemnly, taking his position beside her at the well's edge. Sarah lowered the rope, watching as the tarpaulin cradle descended toward the frantic dog. The water continued to rise, now reaching the animal's belly. "Come on, girl," Sarah called softly. "Step into it. That's it." The dog circled the rope suspiciously, sniffing at the strange contraption. She looked up at Sarah and Tommy, then back at the rope, as if weighing her options. "Please," Tommy whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please, trust us." Whether it was the sound of Tommy's voice or some animal instinct, the dog finally made her decision. With cautious steps, she moved into the center of the tarpaulin cradle, standing perfectly still as the material settled around her. "Now, Tommy!" Sarah cried, grabbing the rope. "Pull!" They heaved together, the rope cutting into Sarah's palms despite the padding of the vines. The dog was heavier than her companion, or perhaps it was just that Sarah's arms were already weakened from the first rescue. The rope creaked ominously as they pulled, inching the dog upward. Tommy's face was screwed up with concentration, his entire body leaning backward as he pulled with all his might. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, but he didn't seem to notice. His focus was absolute. "We're doing it!" Sarah encouraged him, feeling the rope rise inch by painful inch through her hands. "Keep going!" They had raised the dog almost halfway when disaster struck. A particularly violent gust of wind whipped through the clearing, pushing Tommy off balance. He stumbled, momentarily losing his grip on the rope. Sarah, unprepared for the sudden shift in weight, felt the rope slip through her fingers. The dog dropped several feet, a terrified yelp escaping, as she swung against the stone wall of the well. The impact dislodged one of her paws from the cradle. Now she hung precariously, half in and half out of their makeshift sling, scrabbling to regain her footing. "Hold on," Sarah cried, both to Tommy and to the dog. She planted her feet more firmly in the mud, wrapping the rope around her wrists for better purchase. "Pull, Tommy! Pull harder!" Tommy recovered his balance and rejoined her, his small face contorted with determination. Together they strained against the weight, fighting for every inch of progress. Sarah's muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to let go. Not when they were so close. The first dog, the one they had already rescued, had crawled to the edge of the well, watching the rescue effort with apparent anxiety. As the struggling dog came within a few feet of the surface, the first dog began to make soft, whining sounds, almost like words of encouragement. "Almost there," Sarah gasped, her voice ragged with exhaustion. "Just a little more." With one final tremendous heave, they pulled the second dog's head above the rim of the well. Her front paws scrabbled at the stone edge, searching for purchase. Sarah lunged forward, grabbing the dog's scruff while still maintaining her grip on the rope. "I've got her!" she cried. "Keep pulling, Tommy!" Tommy redoubled his efforts, pulling the rope with renewed vigor. The dog kicked and struggled, her back legs propelling her upward. With Sarah's help, she managed to get her front half onto solid ground. A moment later, her back legs followed, and she collapsed onto the wet grass beside her companion. Sarah released the rope, her arms dropping limply to her sides. Every muscle in her body ached with fatigue, but there was no time to rest. Both dogs lay panting on the ground, their swollen bellies heaving with exertion. The second dog was in worse shape, her fur matted with mud and blood from where she'd scraped herself against the well walls. "We need to get them somewhere dry," Sarah said, looking at the sky. The rain had lessened, but the storm was far from over. Night was falling quickly, darkness gathering under the trees. Tommy knelt beside the dogs, his hands moving gently over their wet fur. The dogs didn't flinch from his touch. If anything, they seemed to welcome it, pressing closer to his small body as if seeking comfort. Sarah watched in amazement as her previously mute son whispered to the animals, words she couldn't quite catch. There was something extraordinary about the connection between Tommy and these dogs. Something she couldn't explain but couldn't deny either. The second dog suddenly stiffened, a low whine escaping her throat. Sarah recognized the signs. The labor was progressing. "Tommy, we need to get them home now," she said with renewed urgency. "She's going to have her puppies soon." Tommy looked up, his eyes wide with concern. He nodded and tried to help the first dog to her feet. The animal struggled upright, wobbling on exhausted legs. But the second dog couldn't seem to rise, her body trembling with what Sarah now recognized as contractions. "She can't walk," Sarah realized aloud. "We'll have to carry her." But how? The dog was easily 70 pounds, maybe more. Even without her exhaustion, Sarah doubted she could carry such a weight all the way home through the dark forest. Tommy's face screwed up in thought. He looked around the clearing, then back at his mother. He pointed to his own back, then to Sarah's, mimicking the action of carrying something. "You want us to take turns carrying her?" Sarah asked, doubtful. Tommy shook his head impatiently. He stretched his arms out wide, then brought them together as if gathering something large. He pointed to the tarpaulin scraps, still lying on the ground. Understanding dawned. "A stretcher," Sarah said. "You want to make a stretcher from the tarpaulin?" Tommy nodded vigorously, already moving to collect the largest piece of tarpaulin they hadn't yet cut. Sarah joined him, marveling at her son's resourcefulness. Together they spread the material on the ground, reinforcing its edges with the remaining vines. Carefully, they lifted the second dog onto their makeshift stretcher. The animal was too exhausted to resist, lying limp as they positioned her in the center. The first dog watched anxiously, staying close to her companion. "Okay," Sarah said, taking one end of the stretcher. "You lead the way with the flashlight on my phone. I'll pull the stretcher, and hopefully the other dog will follow." Tommy retrieved Sarah's phone from her pocket, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating a path through the trees. He started forward, the first dog limping along beside him. Sarah gripped the edge of the tarpaulin and began to pull. The material slid relatively easily over the wet ground, but the weight was still substantial. Her arms protested each movement, but she gritted her teeth and continued on. These animals had fought too hard to survive. She wouldn't fail them now. They moved slowly through the forest, Tommy's small form leading the way, the beam of the flashlight dancing over roots and undergrowth. The rain had stopped completely now, but water still dripped from the leaves above, pattering softly around them. The first dog stayed close to Tommy, occasionally looking back as if to check that her companion was still following. Sarah pulled the stretcher carefully, avoiding roots and rocks that might jolt the pregnant animal. The dog lay quiet, though occasional whimpers escaped when they navigated particularly rough terrain. Sarah could see her sides rippling with contractions that were growing more frequent. "We need to hurry," she called to Tommy. "I think the puppies are coming soon." Tommy quickened his pace, expertly finding the smoothest path through the forest. Sarah marveled at his sudden confidence, so different from the silent, fearful child he had been just hours before. Whatever connection he had formed with these dogs had awakened something in him, something strong and brave. As they neared the edge of the woods, the first dog suddenly stopped, her ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Tommy froze, looking back at Sarah with wide eyes. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, setting down the stretcher. "What's wrong?" The dog continued to growl, her gaze fixed on something in the darkness beyond the trees. Tommy moved closer to the animal, placing one small hand on her head. Remarkably, the dog quieted at his touch, though her body remained tense. Sarah strained her eyes, peering through the trees toward their house. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the back garden dimly visible in the fading light. Then a shadow moved near the edge of the property, a human figure walking slowly along the tree line. "Someone's there," Sarah murmured, instinctively stepping in front of Tommy and the dogs. "Stay here." Tommy grabbed her arm, shaking his head frantically. He pointed at the figure, then made a gesture with his hands that Sarah didn't understand. "What is it, Tommy?" she asked. "Do you know who that is?" Tommy hesitated, then nodded slowly. He pointed at the dogs, then back at the figure, his expression troubled. Before Sarah could question him further, the second dog let out a pained whine, drawing their attention. Her contractions had intensified, her body rigid with effort. "The puppies are coming now," Sarah said with growing alarm. "We can't stay out here." She looked back toward the house. The figure had disappeared, but Sarah still felt uneasy. Who had been watching their property, and why did Tommy seem afraid? There was no time to wonder. The dog needed shelter and warmth immediately. Sarah made a quick decision. "We'll go to Mr. Parker's cabin," she told Tommy, gesturing toward the east. Their elderly neighbor lived just a quarter-mile away, in a small hunting cabin he used on weekends. Sarah knew he kept a spare key under the back step. "It's closer, and no one will look for us there." Tommy nodded, immediately changing direction. The first dog followed without hesitation, as if understanding the plan. Sarah lifted the stretcher again, her muscles protesting, but her resolve firm. As they moved through the darkening forest toward the cabin, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was happening here, something that went beyond two stray dogs falling into an old well. The military-style tags, the mysterious figure at their house, Tommy's unexplained fear, and equally unexplained connection to the animals. The second dog whimpered again, more urgently this time. Sarah pushed her questions aside, focusing on the immediate need. Get to safety, help with the birth, protect these creatures who had, somehow, broken through her son's silence. Everything else could wait. Tommy led them unerringly through the trees, the beam of the flashlight steady in his small hand. The first dog limped alongside him, occasionally turning to check on her companion. Despite her exhaustion and her own pregnant condition, she never strayed from Tommy's side, as if she had appointed herself his protector. They reached the edge of a small clearing where Mr. Parker's cabin stood, a solid shadow against the night sky. The windows were dark, confirming that the old man wasn't in residence this weekend. "The key is under the back step," Sarah told Tommy, setting down the stretcher for a moment to catch her breath. "Go, check if it's there." Tommy nodded and darted toward the cabin, the first dog following close behind. Sarah knelt beside the second dog, placing a gentle hand on her heaving side. "Almost there, girl," she murmured. "Just hold on a little longer." The dog's eyes found hers, filled with pain, but also with what Sarah could only describe as trust. This animal who had never met her before today was placing her life, and the lives of her unborn puppies, entirely in Sarah's hands. The weight of that trust settled on Sarah's shoulders, alongside the physical exhaustion of the rescue. But rather than feeling burdened, she felt strangely empowered. For the first time since her husband had walked out, leaving her alone with a traumatized, silent child, Sarah felt capable, necessary, strong. From the cabin came a soft call, Tommy, signaling that he had found the key. Sarah gathered her strength and lifted the stretcher once more, pulling it across the clearing toward the welcoming shelter of the cabin. As they approached, Tommy pushed the door open wide, holding it for Sarah to maneuver the makeshift stretcher through. The first dog had already gone inside, and Sarah could hear her nails clicking on the wooden floor as she explored their temporary refuge. "Good job, Tommy," Sarah said as she carefully pulled the stretcher over the threshold. Now we need to find some blankets, towels, anything soft, and water. Both dogs need water badly. Tommy was already moving, opening cupboards with the familiarity of someone who had visited many times, which Sarah realized he had, back before the fire, before the silence, when he and Mr. Parker would spend hours together learning to whittle or identify bird calls. The cabin was simple but comfortable, consisting of one main room with a small kitchen area, a fireplace, and a bed in the corner. A battery-powered lantern sat on the table, which Tommy immediately switched on, filling the space with warm yellow light. Sarah pulled the stretcher to the braided rug in front of the fireplace. The second dog lay still, her breathing rapid and shallow. Contractions rippled visibly across her swollen belly. "The puppies are coming now," Sarah said, more to herself than to Tommy. "We need to make her comfortable." Tommy appeared at her side with an armful of blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed. Together they arranged them in a nest around the laboring dog. The first dog approached cautiously, sniffing at her companion before settling down beside her, their bodies pressed close together. "Water," Sarah reminded Tommy, who immediately fetched a bowl from the kitchen and filled it from the pump at the sink. As he set the water down near the dogs, Sarah noticed that his hands were trembling. The rush of adrenaline that had carried them through the rescue was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Tommy's face was pale, his eyes shadowed. "You should rest," Sarah told him gently. "You've been so brave today." Tommy shook his head, pointing at the dogs with stubborn determination. His message was clear: he wouldn't leave them now. Sarah sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she settled beside him on the floor, watching as the second dog's labor progressed. The first dog remained vigilant, occasionally licking her companion's muzzle in what seemed like encouragement. Outside, the wind had risen again, howling around the eaves of the cabin. The storm had returned in full force, rattling the windows and driving rain against the roof. Sarah silently thanked whatever instinct or providence had led Tommy into the forest today. Without their intervention, these dogs would surely have drowned in that well. As if reading her thoughts, Tommy leaned against her side, his small body warm and solid. Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "I'm proud of you," she whispered into his hair. "So proud." Tommy didn't speak, but he nestled closer, his eyes never leaving the dogs. Sarah followed his gaze, watching as the second dog shifted position, her body tensing with another contraction. The first puppy was coming. The second dog's body tensed with effort, a low whine escaping her throat. Sarah leaned forward, instinctively placing a reassuring hand on the animal's heaving side. "It's okay, girl," she murmured. "You can do this." Tommy knelt beside her, his small face intense with concentration. Outside, the storm had reached new heights, rain hammering against the cabin roof like angry fists. Thunder shook the windows, and lightning flashes cast brief, stark shadows across the floor. The first dog, the one who had been rescued earlier, positioned herself at her companion's head, gently licking the laboring animal's ears. There was something profoundly moving about the way they cared for each other, Sarah thought, something almost human in their connection. A more powerful contraction rippled across the second dog's belly. She threw her head back, a sharp yelp of pain escaping her muzzle. Tommy flinched at the sound, his hand reflexively finding Sarah's. "It's normal," Sarah assured him, squeezing his fingers. "Birth is painful, but she's strong." As if to confirm her words, the dog gathered herself for another push. Sarah watched in fascination as a small dark sack began to emerge. "Here comes the first puppy," she whispered to Tommy. "Watch." The mother dog strained, her whole body trembling with effort. With a final push, the puppy slid free, still encased in its birth sac. Immediately, the mother turned, tearing the membrane with her teeth and licking the tiny creature vigorously. Tommy leaned closer, his eyes wide with wonder as the puppy took its first breath, making a small, squeaking sound that was nearly drowned out by the storm outside. The mother continued to clean her newborn, nudging it toward her belly, where it instinctively began to search for milk. "A boy," Sarah said, smiling at the tiny, wet creature, "and he looks healthy." Tommy tentatively reached out a finger, then pulled back, looking questioningly at Sarah. "It's okay," she told him. "Just be very gentle. Let his mother do most of the work." Tommy nodded, then carefully stroked the puppy's damp fur with one fingertip. The mother dog watched him, but made no move to stop him. If anything, she seemed to welcome his involvement, as if recognizing him as part of her pack now. Within minutes, the dog was in labor again, her body tensing with renewed contractions. The second puppy came faster, sliding into the world with less effort. Again, the mother immediately tended to her offspring, cleaning away the birth sac and stimulating the puppy to breathe. "Another boy," Sarah noted as the tiny creature squirmed against its mother. A third puppy followed quickly, then a fourth, all seemingly healthy, all finding their way to their mother's milk with instinctive determination. Sarah and Tommy watched in silent awe, witnesses to a miracle of nature that few humans ever saw so intimately. As the fourth puppy nursed, Sarah noticed the mother dog's contractions had eased. She seemed more relaxed now, though her attention remained fixed on her newborns. "I think she's done for now," Sarah said, stroking the exhausted animal's head. 4 healthy puppies. She did beautifully." Tommy nodded in agreement, his fingers gently caressing the mother's ear. The first dog, who had watched the entire process with apparent interest, now settled beside her companion, her own swollen belly pressing against the new mother's back, as if offering support. "She'll probably have her litter soon too," Sarah observed. "Maybe even tonight." Tommy's eyes widened at this prospect. He looked around the cabin, then back at Sarah with a questioning expression. "Yes, we'll stay here until both mothers and all the puppies are safe," Sarah assured him, correctly interpreting his concern. "Mr. Parker won't mind. We can call him in the morning to explain." Relief washed over Tommy's face. He settled more comfortably on the floor beside the dogs, his body relaxing for the first time in hours. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue and the first birth was clearly wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Sarah felt it too, a bone-deep weariness that made her limbs feel leaden. But someone needed to keep watch, to make sure the puppies and their mother remained safe through the night. "Why don't you rest?" she suggested to Tommy, nodding toward the bed in the corner. "I'll wake you if anything happens." Tommy shook his head stubbornly, his gaze fixed on the new family before them. Sarah smiled at his determination, but knew he wouldn't last much longer. Already his eyelids were drooping, his body swaying slightly with fatigue. "At least sit on the couch," she compromised, helping him to his feet. "You'll be more comfortable." Tommy allowed himself to be led to the old leather couch that faced the fireplace. Sarah found a blanket and tucked it around him, just as she had done every night since he was a baby. He didn't resist, though his eyes remained on the dogs until they finally closed in sleep. Sarah watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with love and pride. Her silent, fearful son had shown such courage today, such compassion and determination. Whatever healing had begun in him, when he heard those dogs crying from the well, she would nurture it with everything she had. A soft whine drew her attention back to the dogs. The new mother was shifting position, allowing her puppies better access to nurse. The first dog, still pregnant and waiting her turn, watched with what looked almost like wistfulness. Sarah moved closer, examining the first dog more carefully now that there was time. Her coat, though matted and dirty, was clearly high quality, the rich black and tan of a purebred German shepherd. And now that Sarah looked more closely, both dogs had the same distinctive markings, the same proud bearing despite their current condition. "You're sisters, aren't you?" Sarah murmured, her fingers finding the metal tag on the first dog's collar again. She turned it over, studying the stamped numbers and letters. Not a typical pet ID at all, but something that looked military or official. K9 unit, it read, followed by a series of numbers and the letter E. Sarah frowned, turning to look at the second dog, the one who had just given birth. Sure enough, she wore an identical tag, though hers ended with the letter F instead. "Where did you come from?" Sarah whispered. "And why were you in that well?" The dogs offered no answers, though the first one, E, met Sarah's gaze with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. There was something in that look, something that raised the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck. Not fear exactly, but a distinct sense that these were no ordinary strays. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin windows, making Sarah jump. She moved to check that the door was securely locked, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. The figure she had glimpsed near their house earlier came back to her, the way Tommy had reacted with such alarm. Were these dogs being sought by someone? The military-style tag suggested they might be valuable, perhaps even government property. The thought made Sarah uneasy, but she pushed it aside for now. The immediate needs were shelter, rest, and care for the new puppies. She built a small fire in the fireplace, grateful for Mr. Parker's well-stocked woodpile. As the flames took hold, the cabin filled with warm, flickering light. Sarah checked once more on Tommy, still sound asleep on the couch, then settled herself on the floor near the dogs. The new mother, F, had closed her eyes, her body curled protectively around her nursing puppies. The first dog, E, remained awake, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight as she watched Sarah. "You should rest too," Sarah told her softly. "Your turn will come soon enough." As if understanding, the dog laid her head on her paws, though her eyes remained open, alert. Sarah leaned back against the couch, her own exhaustion creeping over her like a heavy blanket. Just a short rest, she told herself, as her eyelids drooped. Just enough to gather her strength for whatever tomorrow might bring. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The fire had burned low, casting the cabin in dim red light. Outside, the storm still raged, though with less ferocity than before. A soft whimpering sound had awakened her. Not a human cry, but animal. Sarah turned quickly toward the dogs. The new mother was still sleeping peacefully with her puppies, but the first dog, E, was on her feet, her body tense with what Sarah immediately recognized as contractions. "Oh," Sarah gasped, fully awake now. "Your babies are coming too." She glanced at Tommy, still deeply asleep on the couch, then back at the laboring dog. Quickly she arranged more blankets into a second nest, creating a comfortable space for the imminent birth. "Here, girl," she coaxed, patting the blankets. "This is for you." The dog approached cautiously, her gait awkward with the weight of her pregnancy. She circled the blankets once, twice, then settled herself in the center, her amber eyes fixed on Sarah with what looked like gratitude. "Good girl," Sarah murmured, stroking the dog's head. "I'll help you, just like we helped your sister." The first contraction came almost immediately, the dog's body tensing with effort. Sarah stayed close, offering quiet encouragement as the labor progressed. Unlike her sister, this dog seemed more at ease with the birthing process, her movements more controlled, her pain more contained. The first puppy emerged smoothly, a tiny dark shape that the mother immediately cleaned with efficient licks. Sarah watched, fascinated all over again by the miracle unfolding before her. The puppy, a female, was slightly larger than her cousins, her coat a richer black even in its damp newborn state. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered to the mother. "You're doing wonderfully." A second puppy followed quickly, then a third, both males, both strong and healthy by all appearances. The mother tended to each with the same focused attention, cleaning them thoroughly before guiding them to nurse. As the third puppy settled against its mother, Sarah noticed something odd. The dog was still in labor, her contractions continuing with the same intensity, but she seemed distressed now, whining softly and looking back at her swollen belly with apparent concern. "What's wrong, girl?" Sarah asked, leaning closer to examine her. "Is there another puppy coming?" The dog met her gaze with those intelligent eyes, and Sarah could have sworn she saw fear there, real, human-like fear. Another contraction seized the animal, stronger than the previous ones. She threw back her head with a sharp yelp that startled the sleeping puppies. "Mama?" Tommy's voice, soft and uncertain, came from behind her. Sarah turned to find him sitting up on the couch, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "It's okay, Tommy," she assured him. "She's having her puppies too, but I think something might be wrong with this one." Tommy slid from the couch and knelt beside them, his expression serious as he studied the laboring dog. Without hesitation, he placed his small hand on her heaving side, his touch gentle but confident. "Help her, Mama," he said, his voice stronger now. "The baby is sideways." Sarah stared at her son, startled both by his continued speech and by his apparent knowledge. "How do you know that, Tommy?" But Tommy just shook his head, his focus entirely on the dog. "Help her," he repeated urgently. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. She had helped deliver calves during her childhood on her grandparents' farm, though that had been many years ago. The principle would be the same, she reasoned, though the scale was very different. "I need to check the puppy's position," she told Tommy. "Can you keep her calm while I do that?" Tommy nodded solemnly, moving to the dog's head and murmuring softly to her while stroking her ears. The animal leaned into his touch, her whimpers subsiding slightly. Sarah carefully examined the dog, confirming Tommy's assessment. The puppy was indeed positioned incorrectly, attempting to emerge shoulder first rather than head or tail first. "You're right," she told Tommy, amazed once again by his inexplicable connection to these animals. "The puppy is sideways. I'll need to turn it." She took a deep breath, mentally reviewing what she remembered about assisting difficult births. Gently, so gently, she slid her fingers alongside the partially emerged puppy, trying to guide it into a better position. The mother dog tensed, a low growl escaping her throat. "It's okay," Tommy whispered to her. "Mama's helping. She's helping your baby." Remarkably, the dog relaxed at his words, allowing Sarah to continue her careful manipulation. It was delicate work, requiring both gentleness and precision. Sarah worked by feel, her fingers guiding the tiny life into a position where birth would be possible. "There," she murmured, as she felt the puppy shift. "That's better." She withdrew her hands, watching anxiously as the mother dog gathered herself for another push. Tommy leaned forward, his face intent, his hand never leaving the dog's head. "Push!" he whispered. "Push now!" As if obeying his command, the dog strained mightily. The puppy began to emerge, head first now, its tiny form slick with birth fluids. With one final effort, the mother pushed her offspring into the world. But unlike the others, this puppy didn't move. It lay still and silent on the blanket, its tiny chest motionless. "No," Tommy gasped, reaching for the puppy. "No." "Wait," Sarah said, quickly taking the tiny creature in her hands. She rubbed it vigorously with a corner of the blanket, clearing its airways just as she'd seen the mother do with the others. Sometimes they need a little help to start breathing. She continued the gentle stimulation, her heart pounding with fear. The puppy was so small, so fragile, its life hanging by the thinnest thread. The mother dog watched, her eyes filled with what Sarah could only describe as desperate hope. "Please," Tommy whispered, and Sarah wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to the puppy itself. "Please." Just when Sarah was about to give up hope, the tiny creature shuddered. A small, gasping breath expanded its chest, followed by another, stronger one. Then, miraculously, it opened its mouth and let out a squeaking cry that filled the cabin. "Oh!" Sarah gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh, he's alive!" Tommy's face transformed with joy. He reached for the puppy, and Sarah carefully transferred the tiny life to his hands. With infinite gentleness, Tommy placed the newborn before its mother, who immediately began cleaning it with fervent licks. "You did it, Mama," Tommy said, looking up at Sarah with shining eyes. "You saved him." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "We saved him," she corrected softly. "All of us, together." The puppy, revived and energized by its mother's attention, began to squirm toward her belly, searching for milk alongside its siblings. It was smaller than the others, Sarah noticed, and its coat seemed somehow different, lighter in color, with an unusual pattern on its chest. "Look," Tommy said, pointing. "He has a star." Sarah leaned closer, examining the marking. Sure enough, there was a distinct white patch on the puppy's chest, shaped roughly like a star. It stood out starkly against the otherwise dark fur, making the tiny creature instantly recognizable. "That's very special," she told Tommy. "He's special, just like you." Tommy's expression grew serious again, his eyes moving from the puppy to the mother dog and back again. "They're all special, Mama," he said softly. "They're not supposed to be here." Sarah frowned, puzzled by his words. "What do you mean, Tommy? Not supposed to be here where? In the well?" Tommy shook his head, his gaze dropping to the military-style tag on the mother's collar. "They ran away," he whispered. "They ran away because of the bad tests." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What bad tests? Tommy, how do you know this?" But Tommy just shook his head again, his attention returning to the newborn puppies. He reached out to touch the star-marked puppy with one gentle finger, his expression unreadable. Sarah wanted to press him further, to understand what he meant and how he could possibly know such things. But she held back, aware of how fragile his newly recovered speech might be. The questions could wait. For now, it was enough that he was talking at all, enough that he had helped save these lives. The storm outside was finally beginning to abate, the thunder moving into the distance and the rain softening to a gentle patter. Dawn wasn't far off, Sarah realized, noticing the faint lightening of the sky visible through the cabin windows. 8 puppies now slept or nursed between the 2 mother dogs, who lay close together on their blanket nests. Against all odds, all had survived, even the star-marked one who had come so close to death. It was, Sarah thought, nothing short of miraculous. Tommy yawned widely, the excitement of the second birth giving way to renewed exhaustion. Sarah put an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the couch. "Sleep a little more," she told him. The dogs and puppies are all safe now. We can rest." This time Tommy didn't protest. He curled up under the blanket, his eyes already closing. "Stay with them," he murmured as sleep claimed him. "They're still scared." Sarah nodded, though Tommy couldn't see her. "I will," she promised. "I'll keep them safe." As Tommy's breathing deepened into sleep, Sarah settled herself once more beside the dogs. Both mothers were awake, their eyes watching her with that uncannily intelligent gaze. Sarah had the distinct impression they were assessing her, deciding whether she could be trusted with whatever secret they carried. "I don't know what happened to you," she told them quietly. "I don't know where you came from or why you were in that well, but you're safe now, I promise." The dog with the star-marked puppy, E on her tag, shifted slightly, nudging her special offspring closer to Sarah's hand. It seemed like a gesture of trust, perhaps even of thanks. Sarah gently stroked the tiny puppy, marveling at the perfect star on its chest. Something told her this marking was significant, that this particular puppy held some special importance. But like so many other questions that had arisen today, the answer would have to wait. For now, it was enough that they had survived. 2 mother dogs and their 8 puppies, rescued from certain death by a 5-year-old boy who had broken his year-long silence to save them. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, Sarah watched over her unlikely charges, her mind turning over Tommy's mysterious words. Bad tests, running away, not supposed to be here. What had these animals endured? And who might be looking for them even now? The star-marked puppy squirmed in its sleep, tiny paws twitching with dreams. Whatever danger might lie ahead, Sarah vowed silently, she would protect these creatures, just as they had, somehow, helped to heal her son. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving behind a washed-clean world of dripping leaves and puddles that reflected the lightening sky. A new day was beginning, a day that would bring its own challenges and revelations. But for this moment, in this cabin, there was only peace and the quiet miracle of new life. Sarah must have dozed off, because she woke with a start to the sound of whimpering puppies and sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a bright morning that sparkled with raindrops on every leaf and blade of grass outside. Tommy was already awake, kneeling between the 2 mother dogs and watching the puppies with rapt attention. He looked up as Sarah stirred, his face more animated than she had seen it in months. "They're hungry again," he said, his voice still soft, but stronger than it had been the night before. Sarah smiled, joy bubbling up inside her at the sound of his voice. After a year of silence, each word felt like a miracle. "They need to eat often," she explained, moving to join him. "They're growing fast." The puppies, 4 from one mother and 4 from the other, squirmed and squeaked as they nursed, tiny paws pushing against their mothers' bellies. All 8 seemed healthy, even the star-marked one who had given them such a scare during the night. "How are our mama dogs doing?" Sarah asked, gently checking each mother. Both seemed tired but alert, their eyes following her movements with that same unnerving intelligence she had noticed before. "They need food and water," Tommy said matter-of-factly, "and medicine for their cuts." Sarah nodded, impressed by his practical assessment. "You're right. I'll see what Mr. Parker has in his cupboards. Can you stay with them?" Tommy nodded solemnly, settling himself more comfortably between the 2 dogs. Both animals shifted slightly to make room for him, accepting his presence as if he belonged there. Sarah moved to the kitchen area, searching through cabinets and drawers. She found a well-stocked first aid kit, thankfully including antiseptic and gauze, and several cans of beef stew that would have to serve as dog food for now. A quick check of the refrigerator revealed half a carton of milk that smelled fresh enough to use. As she filled a bowl with water from the sink pump, Sarah's mind returned to the questions that had nagged her throughout the night. The military-style tags, Tommy's mysterious words about bad tests, the figure she had glimpsed near their house. She brought the supplies back to where Tommy sat with the dogs, setting everything down on the floor beside him. "I'm going to clean their wounds first," she told him, opening the first aid kit. "Then we'll give them food and water." Tommy nodded, watching intently as Sarah dampened a clean cloth and began gently wiping the mud and dried blood from the first mother dog's coat. The animal, E on her tag, remained perfectly still, allowing the treatment without protest. Sarah found several cuts and scrapes on her legs and sides, likely from her fall into the well. None looked serious, though one on her right foreleg was deeper than the others. "This might sting," Sarah warned as she applied antiseptic to the wound. The dog flinched slightly but didn't pull away. As Sarah worked, she studied the tag on the dog's collar more carefully. In the clear morning light, she could make out additional details she had missed before. Beneath the K9 unit designation and the number sequence was a small symbol, something that looked like a stylized laboratory flask. "Tommy," she said carefully, trying to sound casual, "do you know what these tags mean? Where these dogs might have come from?" Tommy's hands stilled on the puppy he had been petting. He didn't look up at her, but his shoulders tensed visibly. "Bad place," he whispered finally. "They do tests. Make the dogs different." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Different how, Tommy?" Instead of answering, Tommy pointed to the star-marked puppy. "He's special," he said simply. "They want him back most of all." Sarah wanted to press further, but something in Tommy's expression stopped her. There was fear there, real, palpable fear that she didn't want to trigger. Whatever he knew, however he knew it, pushing too hard might drive him back into silence. "Well, they're safe with us now," she said instead, moving on to treat the second mother dog's wounds. "We'll take care of them." Tommy seemed to relax slightly at her words. He returned to gently stroking the puppies, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When Sarah had finished treating both dogs, she opened one of the canned stews and divided it between two bowls. The mothers ate ravenously, practically inhaling the food. Sarah made a mental note to find proper dog food as soon as possible. These animals would need substantial nutrition to produce milk for their puppies. As the dogs ate, Sarah checked her phone. The battery was nearly dead, but she had enough power to make one quick call. She needed to let someone know where they were. "I'm going to call Dr. Martin," she told Tommy, referring to the local veterinarian who had been treating their elderly cat for years. "These dogs and puppies should be checked by a professional." Tommy nodded in agreement, surprising Sarah. She had expected resistance to the idea of involving anyone else. Sarah stepped outside to make the call, wanting a moment of privacy. The morning air was fresh and clean after the storm, the forest around the cabin alive with bird song. She dialed Dr. Martin's number, relieved when the veterinarian answered on the second ring. "Lisa, it's Sarah Conway," she said quickly, aware of her draining battery. "I need your help with something unusual." Briefly, she explained about finding the dogs in the well and the subsequent births, though she left out the details about the military tags and Tommy's cryptic comments. "They seem healthy, but I'd feel better if you could check them. We're at Jim Parker's cabin off Route 16. Dr. Martin asked a few questions about the puppy's conditions, then promised to come as soon as she finished with her morning appointments. "Should be there around noon," she said. "Keep the mothers calm and quiet until then." "There's one more thing," Sarah added hesitantly. "These dogs, they have strange tags on their collars, military-looking. I think they might be, well, valuable to someone." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Martin's voice came back, noticeably more cautious. "What kind of tags exactly?" "They say K9 unit and have numbers, and there's a small symbol, looks like a flask or beaker." Another silence, longer this time. When Dr. Martin spoke again, her voice was low and serious. "Sarah, if these are the dogs I think they are, you could be in danger. There have been rumors." "Well, never mind that now. Don't tell anyone else you have them. I'll be there as soon as I can." The line went dead before Sarah could ask what she meant. She stared at her phone, uneasiness spreading through her chest. Dr. Martin's reaction had confirmed her worst suspicions. These were no ordinary strays. She returned to the cabin to find Tommy exactly where she had left him, contentedly watching over the dogs and puppies. The peaceful scene calmed her somewhat. Whatever danger might be out there, in here was only warmth and new life. "Dr. Martin is coming around noon," she told Tommy. "She'll help make sure the puppies are healthy." Tommy nodded, though his expression had grown serious again. "She's nice," he said simply. "She'll keep the secret." Sarah wondered what secret exactly he was referring to, but before she could ask, the star-marked puppy began squeaking loudly, apparently having lost its way back to its mother's milk. Tommy carefully guided the tiny creature back to a nipple, his movements gentle and assured. "You're good with them," Sarah observed, sitting down beside him, "like you've done this before." Tommy shook his head, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "They talk to me," he said, so softly Sarah almost missed it. "In here." He tapped his temple. Sarah stared at her son, unsure how to respond. Before Tommy's trauma, he had been an imaginative child, often creating elaborate fantasies. But this felt different. The certainty in his voice, the way he interacted with the dogs as if they truly understood each other. "What do they tell you?" she asked finally, keeping her tone light and curious rather than skeptical. Tommy's face grew solemn again. That they ran away because the men in white coats were hurting them, doing things to their babies before they were born. His small hand hovered protectively over the star-marked puppy. "This one is different inside, special." Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Tommy spoke with such conviction, such specificity, and it aligned with the evidence before them, the military tags, the laboratory symbol, Dr. Martin's worried reaction. "Tommy," she said carefully, "how long have you been able to hear them?" He looked up at her, his eyes clear and direct. "Since the well. When I touched them, they showed me pictures, in my head." He frowned slightly, struggling to explain. "Not words exactly, just knowing." Before Sarah could process this extraordinary statement, there was a sound outside, tires on the gravel driveway. She glanced at her watch. It was barely 9 o'clock, much too early for Dr. Martin. "Stay here with the dogs," she told Tommy, moving quickly to the window. A black SUV with government plates had pulled up outside the cabin. As Sarah watched, a tall man in a dark uniform stepped out, adjusting his cap before striding purposefully toward the door. "Tommy," Sarah whispered urgently, "take the dogs and puppies into the bedroom, quickly!" Tommy's eyes widened with fear, but he didn't hesitate. With remarkable efficiency for a 5-year-old, he began guiding the mother dogs toward the cabin's small bedroom, encouraging them to carry their puppies in their mouths. Sarah waited until they had disappeared from view before approaching the door. There was no point pretending no one was home. The SUV parked in front of her car made it obvious someone was here. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door just as the man raised his hand to knock. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice clipped and professional. He held up an ID badge that Sarah didn't have time to examine properly. "Lieutenant James Wilson, Department of Defense Special Projects Division. I'm looking for some missing government property that may have passed through this area." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Government property? What kind of property goes missing in a forest? The man, Lieutenant Wilson, offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 female German shepherds, both pregnant, both wearing identification tags. They're part of a classified research program and considered highly valuable assets. Sarah crossed her arms, blocking the doorway with her body. "I don't see what that has to do with me or why you're at this cabin. This isn't even my property." "We've been tracking them," Wilson said smoothly. "Our last ping placed them in this vicinity before the storm disrupted the signal. And your vehicle was reported near an old well yesterday, a well where we found evidence the dogs had been." Sarah's mind raced. They had been tracking the dogs somehow, perhaps through microchips or some technology embedded in the tags. And someone had seen her car near the well, probably a local who recognized it and mentioned it to authorities when asked. "I was hiking with my son yesterday," she said, the half-truth coming easily. "We got caught in the storm and took shelter here. My neighbor lets me use his cabin sometimes." Wilson's eyes, a cold, pale blue, assessed her carefully. "Mind if I come in and take a look around? These animals are dangerous, ma'am. They've been subjected to experimental procedures that make them unpredictable." "Do you have a warrant?" Sarah asked, hoping her voice didn't betray her fear. Wilson's smile tightened. "I don't need one for matters of national security, but I'd prefer to keep this civil." Sarah was about to respond when a sound from inside the cabin froze her blood, a puppy's high-pitched squeak, clearly audible in the morning quiet. Wilson's head snapped up, his gaze shifting from Sarah's face to the interior of the cabin beyond her shoulder. "What was that?" "My son's toy," Sarah said quickly, "one of those squeaky stuffed animals." But Wilson wasn't buying it. His hand moved to the holster at his hip, not drawing the weapon, but making its presence known. "Step aside, ma'am, now." Sarah felt panic rising in her throat. She had no legal right to refuse him entry, especially if the dogs were indeed government property as he claimed. But every instinct screamed that allowing this man near Tommy and the dogs would be disastrous. Just as the standoff seemed about to escalate, the sound of another vehicle approaching broke the tension. Both Sarah and Wilson turned to see an old blue pickup truck coming up the driveway. Dr. Martin, 3 hours early. Relief flooded through Sarah as the veterinarian stepped out of her truck, medical bag in hand. Dr. Martin took in the scene at a glance, The government SUV, Wilson's threatening posture, Sarah blocking the doorway. "Morning," she called cheerfully, striding toward them with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Got my appointments rescheduled so I could get here sooner. Everything okay, Sarah?" Before Sarah could answer, Wilson turned his attention to the newcomer. "This is a government matter, ma'am. I'll have to ask you to return to your vehicle." Dr. Martin raised her eyebrows, continuing forward until she stood beside Sarah. "I'm Dr. Lisa Martin, the veterinarian for this county. I was called here on a medical emergency." She held up her bag as evidence. "And you are?" Wilson repeated his identification and explanation about missing government property. Dr. Martin listened with an expression of polite interest that didn't quite mask the hardness in her eyes. "Well, Lieutenant," she said when he had finished, "if you're looking for animals with medical needs, then I'm exactly the person who should be here. Why don't we all go inside and discuss this calmly?" Sarah shot the veterinarian a panicked look, but Dr. Martin gave a subtle nod that somehow conveyed reassurance. With no other options, Sarah stepped aside, allowing both Wilson and Dr. Martin to enter the cabin. The main room was empty of dogs or puppies, just as Sarah had instructed Tommy to ensure. Wilson scanned the space with narrowed eyes, taking in the rumpled blankets by the fireplace and the bowls on the floor. "Where are they?" he demanded, turning back to Sarah. Before she could form a response, Dr. Martin interjected smoothly. "If you're asking about Sarah's cat, he's in the bedroom with her son. The poor thing had a bad reaction to his medication. That's why I'm here." Wilson's eyes narrowed further. "I heard a puppy." "That was my son's toy," Sarah repeated, finding her voice again. "Tommy, honey, can you come out here with Mr. Whiskers?" There was a long, terrible moment of silence, during which Sarah feared Tommy wouldn't play along. Then, the bedroom door opened slowly, and Tommy appeared, alone, clutching a small stuffed dog toy that Sarah recognized from his bedroom at home. He must have had it in his backpack yesterday. "Squeeze your toy, Tommy," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Show the nice man how it works." Tommy's eyes, wide with understanding beyond his years, met hers briefly before he squeezed the stuffed toy. A high-pitched squeak, remarkably similar to a puppy's cry, filled the cabin. "See?" Sarah said to Wilson. "Just a toy." Wilson didn't look convinced. "I still need to check the entire premises." "Of course," Dr. Martin said before Sarah could object. "But first, let's see your documentation for these animals you're searching for. Veterinary records, ownership papers, I assume you have those?" Wilson's jaw tightened. "As I explained, this is a classified matter." "Even classified animals need medical records," Dr. Martin interrupted, her pleasant tone unchanged but her eyes hard as flint. "Especially if they're pregnant. What vet has been overseeing their care? What vaccines have they received? What prenatal protocols have been followed?" Wilson opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly thrown by this line of questioning. Dr. Martin pressed her advantage. "And I'll need to see documentation of the breeding program. Was genetic testing done? Were the sires screened for hereditary conditions? What steps were taken to prevent inbreeding?" "That's not," Wilson began. "Because as the county veterinarian," Dr. Martin continued relentlessly, "I'm mandated to report suspected animal welfare violations. And frankly, Lieutenant, pregnant animals going missing from a government facility raises several red flags for me." Wilson's face had reddened slightly. "The welfare of these animals is not your concern, Doctor." "Actually, it is, by law." Dr. Martin set her medical bag on the table with a definitive thump. "Now, either you can show me the appropriate documentation, or I can make some calls to the State Veterinary Board and the Animal Welfare Institute, both of which take a very dim view of experimental procedures on pregnant animals without proper oversight." Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. Dr. Martin, usually so gentle and soft-spoken, had transformed into a formidable opponent. More importantly, she was fighting for the dogs without even having seen them. Wilson seemed to realize he was outmatched, at least for the moment. "I'll return with the necessary documentation," he said stiffly. "In the meantime, if you encounter these animals, you are required by law to report it immediately." He handed Sarah a business card. "Failure to do so will result in federal charges." "Of course," Sarah said, taking the card with a steady hand. "We understand." Wilson gave the cabin one last suspicious sweep with his eyes, lingering on the closed bedroom door where Tommy still stood. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and strode out. None of them moved or spoke until they heard the SUV's engine start and the sound of tires on gravel fading into the distance. Only then did Sarah release the breath she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak with relief. "He'll be back," Dr. Martin said grimly, moving to the window to watch Wilson's departure, with reinforcements, most likely. "You know about these dogs," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Martin turned from the window, her expression grave. "Not specifics, but I've heard rumors. A government facility about 50 miles from here, running experiments on animals, particularly dogs. Something to do with enhanced intelligence, improved communication capabilities." She shook her head. "Nothing confirmed, of course. The place is locked down tight." Sarah glanced at Tommy, who had moved back to the bedroom door, clearly anxious to return to the dogs. "They're in there," she admitted to Dr. Martin. "2 German shepherds with 8 puppies born last night." The veterinarian nodded, unsurprised. "Let's take a look at them. Then we need to decide what to do next, because that man will definitely return. And next time, he won't be alone." Sarah followed Dr. Martin to the bedroom, Tommy leading the way. As she watched the veterinarian's face when she first saw the dogs and puppies, the momentary shock quickly controlled. Sarah knew with absolute certainty that they had stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than she had initially feared. Whatever secrets these dogs carried, powerful people wanted them back, and Sarah had a sinking feeling that those people wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way, even a single mother and her 5-year-old son. Dr. Martin knelt beside the dogs, her experienced hands moving gently over each mother and puppy. Her face remained professionally neutral, but Sarah caught the flash of surprise in her eyes when she examined the star-marked puppy. "Extraordinary," the veterinarian murmured, almost to herself. "I've never seen anything quite like this." "Like what?" Sarah asked, moving closer. "Is something wrong with him?" Dr. Martin shook her head slowly. "Not wrong, exactly. Just different." She gently turned the tiny puppy, revealing the distinctive star marking on his chest. This marking isn't just on his fur, it's on his skin underneath as well, a true birthmark, not just a color pattern. Tommy sat cross-legged beside them, watching intently. "He's special," he said simply, repeating what he had told Sarah earlier. Dr. Martin's eyes flickered to Tommy, then back to Sarah. "You mentioned your son hasn't spoken in a year," she said quietly. "Since when has he been talking again?" "Since yesterday," Sarah replied, "since we found the dogs in the well." The veterinarian nodded thoughtfully, returning her attention to the puppies. All 8 appear healthy, which is remarkable considering the circumstances. The mothers too, though they're undernourished. She began unpacking supplies from her medical bag. "I'll give them fluids and vitamins to help with milk production. The real question is, what to do about Lieutenant Wilson." Sarah glanced anxiously toward the window, half expecting to see the black SUV returning already. "He'll be back, won't he?" "Count on it," Dr. Martin confirmed grimly. "And next time, he'll have backup and probably a warrant, real or manufactured. These dogs are clearly valuable to whoever's running that facility." "What kind of experiments do you think they were doing?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice low so Tommy wouldn't hear. Dr. Martin hesitated, then leaned closer. "There have been rumors for years about a program trying to enhance canine intelligence for military applications. Most people dismissed it as conspiracy talk, but," she gestured toward the dogs, "looking at these 2, I'm starting to think there might be truth to it." Sarah thought about the way the dogs had seemed to understand them during the rescue, the extraordinary connection Tommy claimed to have with them. Tommy says they can communicate with him, show him pictures in his mind. Instead of the skepticism Sarah expected, Dr. Martin looked troubled. The human-canine bond is already unique in the animal kingdom. If someone found a way to enhance that, to create actual telepathic communication, she trailed off, shaking her head. The military applications would be enormous. "And dangerous," Sarah added softly. "Extremely." Dr. Martin finished her examination of the last puppy, then sat back on her heels. "We need to move these dogs somewhere safer. Wilson knows they're in this area, and it won't take him long to figure out what's really in this cabin." "We could go to my house," Sarah suggested. "Too obvious. That'll be the first place they look." Dr. Martin thought for a moment. "I have a better idea. My brother has a cabin deep in the national forest, about 20 miles from here. No road access. You have to hike in the last 2 miles. It's isolated, well-stocked, and virtually unknown." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "Can we get there today?" With some help, yes. Dr. Martin pulled out her phone. Let me make a few calls. We'll need transportation for the dogs and puppies, and we should bring supplies to last at least a week. As the veterinarian stepped out of the bedroom to make her calls, Sarah turned to Tommy. He was sitting between the two mother dogs, one hand resting lightly on each of their heads. His expression was serene, almost trance-like. "Tommy," Sarah said gently, "are you okay?" He blinked, coming back to himself slowly. "They're scared," he said, his voice small but clear. "They remember the needles and the tests. They don't want to go back." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The way Tommy spoke, with such certainty, such specific details, made it increasingly difficult to dismiss his claims about communicating with the dogs. "They won't go back," she promised him. "We're going to take them somewhere safe." Tommy's face remained solemn. "The men will keep looking. They want the star puppy most of all." "Why?" Sarah asked, unable to help herself. "What's special about him?" Tommy's hand moved to the tiny puppy with the star marking. The little creature immediately crawled toward his touch, as if drawn to him magnetically. "He can talk to people," Tommy said simply. "Not just me. Anyone. That's why they want him back." Before Sarah could process this extraordinary statement, Dr. Martin returned, her expression brisk and determined. "My brother's on his way with a truck. My clinic assistant is gathering supplies. We should be ready to move within the hour." "So quickly?" Sarah asked, surprised. Dr. Martin's face grew serious. "Sarah, I made some calls to contacts at other veterinary practices. There are reports of government vehicles at every major road in and out of the county. They're setting up checkpoints, supposedly for a training exercise. They're mobilizing to find these dogs, and they're not being subtle about it." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan, but we move fast. Pack only essentials. Leave no evidence of the dogs here. I've asked my brother to bring a horse trailer. We'll disguise it as a camping trip, with the dogs and puppies hidden inside." Sarah nodded, already moving to gather their few belongings. Tommy watched her for a moment, then turned back to the dogs, whispering something too low for the adults to hear. Within 45 minutes, Dr. Martin's brother arrived, a taciturn, bearded man named Frank, who asked no questions as he helped them prepare the horse trailer, with blankets, food, and water for the dogs. The mothers and puppies were carefully transferred. The tiny star-marked puppy nestled securely against his mother's belly. "The checkpoint on Route 16 isn't fully operational yet," Frank reported as they finished loading. "If we leave now, we should be able to get through before they're checking every vehicle." "Let's go," Dr. Martin agreed, ushering Sarah and Tommy toward her brother's truck. "I'll follow in my pickup. If we get separated, continue to the cabin. Frank knows the way." Sarah settled Tommy in the back seat of Frank's truck, buckling his seatbelt, with hands that trembled slightly from stress and lack of sleep. "Everything will be okay," she told him, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Tommy looked up at her with those solemn eyes that suddenly seemed much older than his 5 years. "I won't let them take the dogs, Mama," he said firmly. "I promise." Something in his tone, the quiet determination, the absolute certainty, gave Sarah pause. In that moment, her son didn't sound like a child at all. The small convoy pulled away from Mr. Parker's cabin, Frank's truck and horse trailer in the lead, Dr. Martin's pickup following. They took back roads whenever possible, avoiding the main highways where checkpoints were likely to be established. For the first hour, they encountered no problems. Sarah began to hope they might make it to the hidden cabin without incident. But as they approached a narrow bridge crossing a river that marked the boundary of the national forest, her hopes were dashed. 2 black SUVs, identical to Wilson's, were parked at the bridge entrance, uniformed men checking each vehicle that passed. "Checkpoint," Frank muttered, slowing the truck. "Stay calm. Let me do the talking." Sarah reached back and squeezed Tommy's hand. "Remember, we're just going camping," she whispered. "Nothing unusual." Tommy nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the horse trailer behind them, where the dogs and puppies were hidden. Sarah could almost feel his concentration, as if he were somehow communicating with the animals, urging them to remain quiet. Frank pulled up to the checkpoint. A uniformed officer approached the driver's window, while another walked around the trailer, peering at it with evident interest. "Morning, sir," the officer said, his tone professionally polite but his eyes sharp and assessing. "We're conducting a security exercise today. Mind if I ask where you're headed?" "Camping trip," Frank replied easily. Got a spot up by Clearwater Creek we use every spring. And who's traveling with you today? The officer's gaze slid to Sarah and Tommy in the back seat. My sister and her family, Frank answered. My sister's following in her pickup. We're meeting my nephew at the campsite. The officer nodded, seemingly satisfied. Mind if we take a quick look in your trailer? Standard procedure today? Sarah's heart lurched. If they found the dogs... It's just camping gear, Frank said with a convincing shrug. But sure, go ahead. The second officer was already moving toward the back of the trailer. Sarah held her breath as he unlatched the door and swung it open. To her horror, one of the puppies let out a tiny, high-pitched squeak. The officer frowned. What was that? Frank didn't miss a beat. Probably my daughter's guinea pig. She insists on bringing it camping. Drives my wife crazy, but what can you do? He chuckled easily, as if sharing a common parental frustration. The officer peered into the trailer, where camping equipment had been carefully arranged to conceal the space where the dogs and puppies lay hidden beneath blankets. After a moment's hesitation, he closed the door. All right, you're clear to proceed. Enjoy your camping trip. Frank nodded his thanks and pulled away slowly, maintaining a perfectly casual speed. Sarah didn't dare breathe normally until they were across the bridge and out of sight of the checkpoint. That was close, she whispered, glancing back to make sure Dr. Martin's pickup was still following them. Frank's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Too close, and that won't be the last checkpoint. He was right. They encountered 2 more roadblocks in the next hour, each more thorough than the last. At the third checkpoint, they were asked to step out of the vehicle while officers conducted a more extensive search. Sarah stood by the side of the road, one arm around Tommy's shoulders, watching with barely concealed terror as the officers poked through their belongings in the truck and approached the trailer once again. This time, the dogs couldn't remain hidden. As the officer opened the trailer door wide and moved camping gear aside, his flashlight beam fell directly on the nest of blankets where the mothers and puppies were concealed. Hey, he called to his partner, I've got something here. Sarah's grip on Tommy tightened instinctively. Frank tensed beside them, his hand moving slightly toward his waistband. Did he have a weapon concealed there? Dr. Martin, who had been questioned separately with her vehicle, was now walking rapidly toward them, her face tight with concern. Before anyone could react further, Tommy slipped from Sarah's grasp and darted forward, placing himself directly between the officer and the trailer. They are mine, he said, his young voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The officer looked down at the small boy in surprise. What's that, son? The dogs, Tommy said, standing straight and unafraid. They're my dogs. You can't take them. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then looked back at Tommy with a patronizing smile. We're not taking anyone's pets, buddy. We're just checking. He broke off as one of the mother dogs, the one with the star-marked puppy, appeared at the trailer door behind Tommy. Instead of running or cowering, she stood tall, her amber eyes fixed on the officer with unnerving intensity. A low growl rumbled in her throat. The officer took an involuntary step back, his hand moving toward his holster. Sir, he called to Frank, you need to control your animal. But Frank remained frozen, as startled as the officer by this development. It was Tommy who responded, placing one small hand on the dog's head without looking away from the officer. She won't hurt you, Tommy said calmly. She's just protecting her babies, like my mama protects me. Something extraordinary happened then. The dog's growl subsided immediately at Tommy's touch. She pressed against his side, her posture relaxing from aggressive to merely alert. The second mother dog appeared beside her, both now flanking Tommy like furry sentinels. The officer stared, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Those dogs, they have tags. Military tags. They're mine, Tommy repeated firmly. They ran away from bad people who hurt them. I found them and saved them. They're mine now. Sarah held her breath, certain that at any moment the situation would explode into violence. These men were clearly part of the search operation for the missing dogs. They had to recognize the tags, understand the significance of what they were seeing. But something in Tommy's stance, the absolute certainty in his young voice, the way the dogs responded to him, seemed to give the officer pause. He looked from Tommy to the dogs and back again, confusion evident on his face. At that moment, Dr. Martin stepped forward smoothly. I see you've met my nephew's rescue dogs, she said, her tone professionally pleasant. I've been treating them for neglect and abuse. Terrible situation. They were abandoned, pregnant, and half-starved. She fixed the officer with a direct gaze. As the county veterinarian, I've documented their condition thoroughly. All the appropriate authorities have been notified, of course. The officer frowned. These dogs have military identification tags. They are government property. Actually, Dr. Martin countered, those tags are over 2 years old. The dogs were officially decommissioned from service and adopted through the military working dog program. I have the paperwork in my truck if you'd like to see it. Sarah marveled at the veterinarian's ability to lie so convincingly. Of course there was no such paperwork, but the confident way Dr. Martin offered it made the claim sound completely plausible. The officer hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed. His partner approached, leaning in to murmur something that Sarah couldn't hear. After a tense moment, the first officer nodded reluctantly. That won't be necessary, ma'am. Sorry for the confusion. He turned to Frank. You folks can proceed. Have a good camping trip. Relief washed over Sarah like a physical wave. She moved forward to take Tommy's hand, avoiding looking directly at the dogs for fear her expression might betray the truth. Thank you, officer, she said, guiding Tommy back toward the truck. We're just looking forward to a quiet weekend in nature. The dogs returned to the trailer without prompting, disappearing back under the blankets as if they understood the need to remain hidden. Frank closed and secured the door, then ushered everyone back to their vehicles. They pulled away from the checkpoint with deliberate casualness, maintaining exactly the speed limit until they were well out of sight. Only then did Sarah release the breath she'd been holding. Tommy, she said shakily, how did you... Words failed her. What she had just witnessed defied explanation. The way the dogs had responded to Tommy, positioning themselves beside him like trained guards. The way they had instantly calmed at his touch. It was as if they truly were communicating somehow. Tommy looked up at her, his expression serene. They trust me, he said simply, and I promise to protect them. Frank, who had been silent during the entire exchange, finally spoke. Your boy has a way with animals, he said, his gruff voice softened with something like awe. Never seen anything like it. Neither have I, Sarah admitted, stroking Tommy's hair. Neither has anyone. They drove for another hour, finally turning onto a rough forest service road that wound deep into the wilderness. Eventually, even this primitive track ended, and Frank parked the truck in a small clearing. We walk from here, he explained, climbing out. About 2 miles to the cabin. We'll have to carry the puppies, but the mother dogs can walk. Dr. Martin joined them, bringing backpacks filled with supplies. I radioed ahead to my nephew. He's at the cabin getting things ready. He'll help us carry everything. Sarah looked doubtfully at the forest path, then at the trailer containing 2 adult dogs and 8 tiny puppies. How do we transport the puppies safely? Frank was already pulling a large backpack with a custom-built carrier from his truck. Made this for falconry equipment, he explained, but it'll work for puppies too. Padded, waterproof, and has air vents. Together, they carefully transferred the puppies to the carrier, making sure they had enough space and padding. The star-marked puppy was placed in the center, surrounded by his siblings for warmth and protection. The mother dogs watched anxiously but didn't interfere, as if understanding that this temporary discomfort was necessary for their safety. When the carrier was secured on Frank's back, they fell into step beside him, occasionally looking up as if checking on their offspring. Tommy walked between the 2 dogs, one hand resting lightly on each of their backs. They matched their pace to his, slowing when he slowed, stopping when he stopped to rest. The bond between them was visible to everyone now, undeniable and profound. Dr. Martin led the way, with Frank and the puppy carrier next, then Tommy and the mother dogs, with Sarah bringing up the rear. They moved as quickly as they could, while being careful not to exhaust the already weakened mother dogs. The forest grew denser as they walked, the path narrower and less distinct. Sarah was grateful for Dr. Martin's confident navigation. Without a guide, they would have been hopelessly lost in minutes. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, they crested a small rise, and the cabin came into view. It was smaller than Mr. Parker's, but solidly built of logs and stone, with a metal roof that would shed snow in winter, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that Dr. Martin's nephew had indeed arrived ahead of them. We made it, Dr. Martin said, relief evident in her voice. From here, the dogs will be nearly impossible to track. The nearest road is miles away, and the Forest Service rarely patrols this deep. As they approached the cabin, the door opened and a young man stepped out, presumably Dr. Martin's nephew. He hurried down to meet them, taking the heavy pack from his uncle's shoulders and leading the way to the cabin. Inside, the space was warm and welcoming, despite its rustic simplicity. A fire blazed in the stone fireplace, and lanterns provided soft light in the gathering dusk. The main room held a table, chairs, and a comfortable-looking sofa. 2 doors led to what Sarah assumed were bedrooms. "This is my nephew, Mike," Dr. Martin introduced the young man, who nodded in greeting. "He's in veterinary school, following in the family footsteps." Mike immediately set about creating a comfortable space for the dogs and puppies, arranging blankets near the fire and setting out water and food. The mother dogs entered cautiously, inspecting every corner of the cabin before finally relaxing enough to allow their puppies to be transferred to the new nest. "They seem healthy," Mike observed as he helped count and examine the puppies. 8 total, right? 4 from each mother?" "Yes," Dr. Martin confirmed, "though this one," she indicated the star-marked puppy, "is of particular interest." Mike leaned closer, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the distinctive marking. "Incredible! A perfect star pattern. I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have the people who are looking for these dogs," Dr. Martin said grimly, "which is why they want them back so badly." As the adults discussed security measures and plans for the coming days, Tommy settled himself beside the dogs, who seemed to have accepted the cabin as their new sanctuary. The star-marked puppy had wiggled free of his siblings and was now attempting to crawl into Tommy's lap, his tiny legs wobbling with the effort. "He likes you," Sarah observed, sitting down beside her son. Tommy nodded, carefully lifting the puppy and cradling him against his chest. "He wants to show me something," he said quietly. "Something important." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Tommy's eyes suddenly widened. He stared at the puppy with an expression of absolute wonder, completely still, except for his rapid breathing. "Tommy?" Sarah touched his shoulder gently. "What is it? What's wrong?" For several long moments, Tommy didn't respond. Then, slowly, he blinked and turned to look at her, his eyes filled with tears. "He showed me," Tommy whispered, "where they came from, what they did to them." A single tear slid down his cheek. "They put things in their heads, Mama, to make them talk to people, to make them see far away and tell secrets." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Tommy, how can you possibly know that?" "He showed me pictures," Tommy insisted, "like a movie in my head." He pointed to the tiny star on the puppy's chest. "This isn't just a mark. It's where they're different. Their hearts have more connections. To each other, to people." He struggled to find the words. "They're not just dogs anymore, Mama. They're something else too." Dr. Martin had fallen silent, listening to Tommy with an expression of fascination and concern. "Neural enhancement," she murmured, "combined with genetic manipulation. It's theoretically possible, but the ethical implications—" "They want them back," Tommy said, his voice stronger now. "Especially this one. He can do more than the others. That's why they're looking so hard." Sarah looked from her son to the tiny puppy in his arms, then to the mother dogs watching them with those intelligent, knowing eyes. Whatever had been done to these animals, whatever they had become, one thing was clear. They had escaped for a reason, had hidden themselves and their unborn puppies from people who saw them only as experiments, as weapons. "They won't get them back," she said firmly, meeting the gaze of each mother dog in turn. "I promise you that. You're safe now." As if understanding her words, the mother of the star-marked puppy moved closer, pressing her warm body against Sarah's side in what felt unmistakably like gratitude. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, wrapping the forest cabin in a protective blanket of night. Inside, gathered around the fire, an unlikely family had formed. 2 women, 2 men, a previously mute boy, 2 extraordinary dogs, and 8 puppies, one of whom might just change the world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face from the people searching for these remarkable animals, they would face them together. And somehow, Sarah thought, as she watched her son whisper to the star-marked puppy, she had never felt more certain that they would prevail. The star-marked puppy yawned, his tiny pink tongue curling as he nestled more securely in Tommy's arms. Just a baby, Sarah thought. Just a tiny, innocent life who never asked to be made different, to be given abilities beyond his nature. Yet in his difference lay his power, in his uniqueness, his strength. Just like Tommy, who had found his voice again because of these dogs, who had discovered a courage and certainty in himself that Sarah had feared lost forever after the trauma he had endured. Perhaps there was a lesson there, she thought, as the fire crackled and the forest night creatures sang their ancient songs outside. Perhaps in our differences, in the very things that make us vulnerable, we find our greatest power. And perhaps in protecting those who cannot protect themselves, we discover the best of what we can be. Tommy looked up at her, as if sensing her thoughts, and smiled, a real smile, bright with hope and determination. "We'll be okay, Mama," he said with the simple confidence of childhood. The dogs said so. And somehow, watching the star-marked puppy sleeping peacefully in her son's gentle hands, Sarah believed him. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story of courage, connection, and the extraordinary bond between a boy and his special furry friends, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love to hear from our global audience. Remember, the most powerful miracles often happen in the most unexpected places, sometimes even at the bottom of an old well, and sometimes the smallest hearts show the greatest courage.